On to the next section of our day. We'll go to the session 2. To begin with the second session, I would like to invite our chairman, Dr. Om Prakash Singh Maurya. Sir, can you please unmute the mic and switch on your camera? I would also like to welcome our co-chairpersons for the session, Dr. V.P. Gupta and Dr. Sabita Katot. I kindly ask you to unmute the mic and switch on the camera. I would also like to welcome our convener, Professor Rajiv Garg, and co-conveners of the session, Dr. Mandeep Singh Bajaj and Dr. Bipasha Mukherjee. I kindly ask you to unmute the mic and switch on the camera. May I also welcome our moderators, Dr. Mukesh Khare and Dr. Mohammed Javed Ali.
Thank you.
Over to the chairpersons. Thank you.
Is Dr. O.P. Maurya available?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Now we can start.
Let's start the session.
Okay. The first paper is comparing therapy for Mobian gland dysfunction, impact on tear film and cataract surgery outcome. Presenting author is Dr. Rushad Saraf.
Good morning, sir. I'll just share my screen. Is it visible, sir? Can I proceed, sir?
Yes, start.
Thank you, sir. So my free paper is on meibomian gland dysfunction and the impact on tear film metrics and cataract surgery outcomes. At the outset, I'd like to declare that I have received a research grant from Johnson & Johnson for this study. Now, MGD has become more and more important because of the increased incidence of evaporative dry eye, and it's basically classified by the DEWS 2 into the low delivery and the high delivery type, with a lot of different reasons for this. Why is this important in cataract surgery? Because of certain preoperative problems like errors in topography and IOL calculation, along with postoperative issues such as irritation, poor visual quality, and poor tear film metrics like low TBUT and a low speed score. Various different studies have shown that the tear film actually deteriorates after cataract surgery. Therefore, treatment of MGD before surgery is a must. With this in mind, we propose the research question of whether newer modalities would be more effective in the treatment and would impact post-operative outcomes. The purpose of our study was to compare the standard of care versus LipiFlow, which is the vector thermal pulsation, in the treatment of MGD, and to analyze changes in the tear film characteristics in patients undergoing these treatments. The secondary objective was to study the impact of treating MGD before cataract surgery on patient satisfaction following the procedure. And this was a prospective randomized single-center interventional hospital study. Consecutive patients undergoing cataract surgery, the same surgeon performed the surgery with the same type of IOL were included, and they were divided into 3 different groups, which was the LipiFlow group, the traditional treatment arm, and the no treatment arm with a normal TBUT, which was patients who did not have evaporative dry eye. The tests done included meniscometry, the usual Schirmer's, fluorescein staining TPAT, a non-contact TBUT, LipiView, and a speed score was conducted for all the patients. We excluded patients with corneal or retinal pathology, anything that could affect the surgery in terms of complications, prior refractive surgery, contact lens wearers, or patients on systemic or ocular medications that affect the tear film and vision. Statistical analysis was done with the MedCalc software. Normality of data was looked at with the Shapiro-Wilk test. The data was found to be not normally distributed, and therefore we used the Friedman, Kruskal-Wallis, Mann-Whitney, and Wilcoxon test for analysis. The results, the initial preoperative comparison, this table just shows that all the data was comparable beforehand, and there were not significant differences except in the TBUT, which was a criteria for separating the groups. Coming to the kind of results for the no treatment group, which is group C, we saw that the speed, Schirmer's, fluorescent BUT, and the tear breakup time non-contact was significantly worse over a period of time of 1 month and 3 months post the surgery, in the patients who had not undergone any kind of treatment, which is in correspondence with what has been published in previous data. In the conventional treatment arm, we saw that the fluorescent TBUT and the non-contact TBUT actually showed a improvement, as there were also changes in the higher order aberrations and the spherical aberration. In the LipiFlow group, which was the group A arm, we saw a significant improvement in the speed score, the TBUT, the meniscus height, the lipid layer thickness, showing that there was a vast improvement following the LipiFlow treatment. We also did a change analysis to look at the ratio of post-op and pre-operative parameters to see how each group was changing vis-a-vis the pre-operative parameter. Again, in this, what we see is that the LipiFlow group did significantly better both than the conventional treatment and the no treatment arm in terms of tear film metrics. There was no significant change in the high order aberrations and the spherical aberration. And the same was noted for the 3 months change analysis. So basically the objective and subjective tear film parameters show significantly better improvement in the LipiFlow group compared to the other two groups. When we also looked at the percentage improvement, that is the number of subjects showing improvement, in the LipiFlow group, there was a significantly higher proportion of subjects showing improvement in the speed score, the TBUT, and the lipid layer thickness. The meibography, however, did not show any significant improvement between the groups, and the uncorrected, corrected distant visual acuity, higher order aberrations, and spherical aberrations were all comparable in the 3 groups. So what was known was that ocular procedures like cataract surgery have an adverse impact on tear film metrics, and there's a subjective worsening of symptoms following cataract surgery. Therefore, treatment of dry eye before surgery helps improve post-operative comfort. What this study has is that the vectored thermal pulsation therapy significantly improves tear film metrics and subjective patient comfort to a higher extent than the conventional therapy. To conclude, the treatment of MGD before cataract surgery improves patient satisfaction and tear parameters after cataract surgery. Treatment with vector thermal pulsation shows greater efficacy and benefit over traditional therapy in patients with moderate MGD undergoing cataract surgery, and further studies and a larger sample size are required to verify the same. Thank you.
Sir, may I ask a question to you?
Yes, sir.
What are the causes of ocular irritation in post-op cataract? There is most of the patients are complaining of ocular irritation. What are the causes of ocular irritation?
So ocular irritation, one is basically the nerves getting transected by the surgical incisions. There are also preservative in our eye drops, which can cause ocular irritation. There's disturbance of the tear film metrics and increased incidence of evaporative dry eye. And MGD post-cataract surgery is one. All these are common causes of irritation post-cataract surgery. In things like LASIK, you can have a large flap, which again transects the nerves, and that can also cause dry eye.
But in this, the main cause of ocular irritation, there is a change in the composition of the tear film.
Yes, sir.
That is the main reason of causing irritation. Otherwise, all other factors may lead to the dry eye.
Sir, also in this study, we had looked at osmolarity. I haven't mentioned it here because it was not significant. So we tried to look at tear osmolarity as part of it. We couldn't see composition in detail because we don't have the ability to see that. But in terms of osmolarity, there was no significant change in the groups.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Shroff.
Thank you, sir.
So before we proceed,
Dr. Habib has a commitment elsewhere. She wants to present the paper.
So,
Can we allow this, sir?
Next. Then we will.
Dr. Habib has some commitment in some other hall.
May I call him? If he want to present, he may present. But
Yes.
The next presenter is evaluating the efficacy of nasolacrimal duct probing with mitomycin C in the tertiary center of Jharkhand. The presenting author is Dr. Shefa Habib. Whether he will be presenting or not.
good morning, sir.
Yeah, she is there.
She is there. Shefa Habib,
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
yeah, start.
you are a non-ratified member, so your in this marks will be not. We will not give the marks in this presentation. So,
Okay, sir.
okay, because you are a non-ratified member. Okay. Okay, now you present.
Start.
Start.
कहाँ गई मैं, कहाँ गई? It's what is happening? So my screen is not being shared.
Ma'am, first of all, open your PPT. Click share screen, ma'am.
Yes, I'm
Yes, ma'am.
clicking it. Okay.
You share the.
First click on share screen, then click on your presentation.
Click the above green
Yes.
button.
Going on.
So, God.
Ma'am, please first of all, open your PPT. Please.
Okay.
Then share. Just please put on slideshow, ma'am.
Yes. Is it visible to all?
Yes,
Yeah, it is
please go ahead.
Please go.
Good morning, sir. My topic is evaluating efficacy of nasolacrimal duct probing with mitomycin C in Tertiary Center of Jharkhand. I declare there is no financial help regarding this study. If we talk about nasolacrimal duct obstruction, it is common disorder in adult. It produces intermittent or constant tearing, and patient came with complaint of blood visions and later either due to the acute dacryocystitis or chronic dacryocystitis. Causes can be congenital, infectious, cicatricial, traumatic, neoplastic, involutional, iatrogenic, or idiopathic. And there are several surgical methods for nasolacrimal duct obstruction treatment, like the cryocystinostomy, but it is invasive and burdensome. Whereas probing, it's easier, but it causes recurrent obstruction. So my aim of study was to use mitomycin C to see whether it's effective for nasolacrimal duct probing. It was prospective, comparative, randomized interventional study, and it includes 16 individuals, which were divided into two groups. It was done in the duration period of 6 months. First, patient were taken proper history of epiphora, and then slit lamp examination were done to rule out any other ocular pathology. After that, location obstruction were located with the help of probing with saline solution. Inclusion criteria was the patient age must be more than 15 years and less than 40 years and suffering from epiphora. But exclusion criteria was that there should not be any history of surgical intervention, diabetes mellitus, any eye trauma, or any nasal structure abnormalities, or lacrimal system tumor, or severe atrophic rhinitis, or epiphora due to other causes like misdirected lashes, ectropion. In my method in group A, which is constitute of 30 patients, here we use mitomycin C for irrigation under tropical anesthesia. We prepared 0.2 milligram per ml and 1 ml was used, injected into the duct, followed by nasal packing for 10 minutes, and patient was asked not to swallow. Then they were goggled with water, and then again the ocular surface were irrigated with normal saline, and they were sent back with the administration of antibiotic, and then they are followed. While in group B, only irrigation were done with normal saline mixed with betadine. It was then followed at 2 weeks, then at 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months after the procedure. And every checkup, patients were asked whether there any other discomforts relating to the syringing, and then probing patency was confirmed by irrigation. If patency was low, then procedure was again repeated only if 2 months had completed after the first procedure. And other slit lab examination were done to see no other side effects had occurred due to use of mitomycin C. Results were in group A, my total male patients were around 16, while in female was 13, and the age group was around 30. Whereas in group B, male was 15 and female was 12, while mean age was 34. After 6 months of symptoms, we see that the patient group A where mitomycin C were used, 6 patients has no complaint of watering, while 9 patients complain of mild watering, 3 moderate, and 12 patients have profound watering. While in the group B where we use only normal saline, 18 patients came with complaint of profound watering after 6 months, and only 2 patients complained that were no watering after 6 months. So we statistically significant difference were seen in the patency rate, where in the group A success rate was 60% and in group B it was only 40%. So my discussion is mitomycin C, since it is a chemotherapeutic antibiotic isolated from Streptomyces caspitosus, and it minimizes and it inhibits DNA synthesis by inducing cross-linkage between DNA-based pairs and induce breakage of single stranded, and prevents that, and that's why it prevents fibroblast proliferation and modifies wound healing response, which leads to less scarring and fibrosis on the common osteotomy and canalicus site. And this same study was seen where they reported full absence of watering in 25% and moderate improvement in 47% and mild improvement in 11%. Another study also success rate was 65% and patency rate was 30%. In study of Cutanum, dose of 0.2 milligram per ml mitomycin C significantly reduced epiphora symptom after probing in nasolacrimal duct obstruction, compared with that in patient where only normal saline solution were used. So my conclusion is overall success rate of probing with mitomycin C was significant since it was 60% success rate, and it does not show any relationship with the sex. Both male and female shows equal response, but with increasing age, failure rate was high and does not show any relationship with the side of nasolacrimal duct obstruction. And no significant side effect was seen with after probing with mitomycin C. On the basis of my finding, I say that nasolacrimal probing with mitomycin C can induce subjective improvement in epiphora, and we can use, since it is simple, quick, cost-effective daycare procedure with low morbidity, and also in those patients who refuse or not systemically fit for undergoing the rhinocystostomy. Thank you, sir.
May I ask a question to you?
Yes, sir.
What is the time when this you are using this mitomycin C, but it is of a moment, momentary, it goes in a moment, it goes through the nasolacrimal canal, NLD.
Yes, yes,
So
sir.
in a very short time, whether it is effective or not effective, do you know any time in which this will be effective? Otherwise, it remains very in a moment, please, so
Yes,
whether
sir.
it will be effective or not.
So how much time I kept? You're asking how much time I kept while?
No, because you have not kept, you have just do the syringing.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
in syringing, it's a momentary stay of this mitomycin C.
Yeah, momentary stay.
So in this momentary stay, whether this mitomycin C, it will be its action will be there, or it is only just it pass away and it will not act in the nasolacrimal duct probing.
No, sir. It will stay. So my main was not just to put and followed by irrigation with normal saline. We allowed mitomycin C. Since patient was
After that, we have syringes with the
normal
antibiotic.
ocular surface and everything was washed.
So it will wash away.
But the required concentration will be there since it show effect.
But it's very inconclusive that because there's some time limit, it must be some time. because once we are putting on the ostium, then usually we have to keep there for 3 minutes.
So we put for 2
So
minutes.
for antifibrosis action,
Yes, sir.
so that prevent the fibrosis, I think there should be some time, at least 1 minute. So stay, then it will function. Otherwise, I don't think it will function up. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. The next paper, sir.
Next paper is surgical success in W-shaped versus tier through incision in external diaphragmatic rhinostomy. Dr. Isa Acharya. Dr. Isa Acharya, are you ready? Yeah. She is there.
Good morning, all the judges. My screen visible.
Yes,
Hello?
ma'am, please go ahead.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Good morning. I am going to present my free paper on surgical success in W-shape versus tear trough incision in external diaphragmatic rhinostomy. So, standard treatment for acquired nasolacrimal duct obstruction has been diaphragmatic rhinostomy surgery. It can be performed either externally or endonasal approach. The success rates of 63 to 82% have been reported for intranasal surgeries as opposed to DCR, external DCR, which is about more than 90%. However, one of the complication is the formation of a cutaneous scar, which is absent in endonasal DCR surgery. So various incisions have been tried, like vertical, tear trough, and subciliary incision, or the W-shaped incision. To compare surgical success of W-shape versus tear trough incision in external diaphragmatic rhinostomy was our aim. So it was performed at GTB Hospital with 61 patients, which were randomized into 30 and 31 cases in group 1 and 2 respectively. The inclusion criteria was patients with primary acquired nasolacrimal duct obstruction with common canalicular obstruction, and also the patients willing for the surgery. Also, the cases of failed external DCR, any local or systemic contraindication to the DCR, scar already present at the surgical site, lacrimal fistula, local trauma, they were all excluded. Group 1 had external DCR with tear trough incision that was performed 3 to 4 mm medial to the medial campus, just under the medial campal tendon, which extended infrolaterally into the tear trough. Then W-shaped incision was started 8 mm medial to the medial campus with 3 equilateral triangles with 4 mm side lengths as shown in the picture. Functional assessment was done using Monk's score, and the success was considered to be grade 0 to 1. Cosmetic assessment was done using Devoto score with a success of grade 0 to 1 was considered as cosmetic success. And anatomical assessment was done using syringing probing at 3 months, and the success was considered to be patent nasolacrimal passages. The mean age of our population was about 40 years of age, while majority of patients were females. Also, the most common indication was primary acquired MLD obstruction without a mucosa. The medial palpebral ligament excision was done in all cases of W-shaped incision group, while none of the cases of group 1. Also, the duration of surgery was found to be more in group 2, but it was not statistically significant. Now, what we see from the diagram is that in the W-shaped incision, it was extending above the medial palpebral ligament. So it was cut in all the cases. While in this case, the tear trough incision extended below the medial palpebral ligament, so the excision was not required. Also, the most common intraoperative complication was mucosal bleed that was observed. And the complications which were specific to W incision was skin flap tear and the reversible blackening of the skin flaps or their aphysis. And the post-operative complication was noted that edema as well as epiphora was significantly more in group 1, that is the tear trough incision group. Then when we compared epiphora at different months, we noticed that on day 1, we already said that it was significantly more in group 1, while in 1 month, we observed more number in cases of W-shaped incision. And causes of causes of functional epiphora with patent lacrimal passages on syringing and Thurman was as follows. At group 1, there were 2 cases. In one case, there was a canalicular obstruction with spontaneous extrusion of the intubation stent on day 2. While in case 2nd, there was an inferior canalicular stricture with intubation stent in situ. In group 2, there was an inflammatory cause with history of pre-op repeated acute attacks and persistent inflammation post-operatively. Also, we noticed that subjective scar grading was maximally done with grade 0, while objectively the grading was done more to be grade 1. This was the outcome, that grade, this was the worst grade, the grade 3, and this is the good grading, which is grade 0. The probable causes of noticeably scar formation is scar assessment at a short follow-up period, Indian race with dark and oily skin who tend to have more scarring, vicarial sutures tend to have more inflammation, and poor subjective grade done by younger population, and poor objective grade due to more details seen in photographic evaluation. Surgical success was noticed that they were all comparable. Either it is functional, anatomical, or cosmetic success rate, they were all comparable between the two groups. Very few studies have been done in the literature regarding W shape. It was done by Akinci et al., Yazisi, and Wadwekar and Derem et al. So what they noticed was that Yazisi and Akinci compared it with vertical incision, and W shape was found to have better cosmetic results, while Wadwekar found that curvilinear incision was better. However, Derem et al. Found that cosmetic outcome was comparable between both W-shape and curvilinear incision, just like in our case. In our study also, there were comparable results. However, one problem was that we compared the results at 3 months. So they cannot directly be compared with other studies because they had a longer follow-up period. Like Yazisi, Akinci, Wadwekar, they had 6 months follow-up, while Derem et al. Had 18 months follow-up. So what advantages and disadvantages we found regarding W-shaped incision were that in advantages, there were better surgical exposure, delineation of tissue, easy dissection through subcutaneous plane, lesser need for wound retraction using CAT score, significantly less post-operative edema and epiphora on post-operative day 1 with better post-operative rehabilitation. While surgical time was prolonged, this could be because of the fashioning of the W-shaped incision. Also, the suturing time it takes more than a tear truck, and also there was some darkening of apices of the flaps. This was also seen by the study by Akinci et al. So we conclude that cosmetic functional anatomical results are comparable to the conventional tear trough incision. Hence, it can be considered as a good acceptable alternative to tear trough incision in external diagnosis or rhinoscopy. Thank you, everyone.
Madam, may I ask a question to you?
Yes.
What is the main advantage of doing W-shaped incision?
So basically, we found that what we do is when we make a W-shaped incision, the flaps we can use traction sutures in them, and because of that, there is more traction and there is enhanced surgical exposure because of that particular thing, and also this with better surgical delineation of tissues also because of the better exposure. While in tear trough incision group, we found that there was more usage of CAT score. So again, that was a problem. So again, there was a less exposure. Plus, in this, we were cutting the medial palpebral ligament in case of W-shaped incision, which further enhanced the exposure. So that was a good thing.
But usually nowadays, in most of the cases, the medial palpebral ligament usually
Yes.
not cut. Because
Yes.
there is no need to cut now. Nowadays, most of the surgeons are doing without cutting the medial palpebral ligament.
Yes.
You will be not scored in this because you are a non-ratified member.
Thank you.
We will call the next presenter.
Next presenter is autorefractometer, a window to the meibomian glands.
Dr. Aishwarya Joshi.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Aishwarya Joshi is ready?
Yes, sir.
Well, go ahead.
Now you start.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Aishwarya Joshi, and today I would like to introduce to you autorefractor as a window to the meibomian glands as per a study conducted at KJ Somaiya Medical College, Mumbai. We have no financial disclosure. Meibomian gland dysfunction was defined by the International Workshop for Meibomian Gland Dysfunction as a chronic diffuse abnormality of the Meibomian glands, commonly characterized by terminal duct obstruction and or qualitative or quantitative changes in the glandular secretion. Its prevalence ranges from 0.39% to 69.3%. There are two types: the low delivery obstructive type, which is characterized by gland distortion and gland atrophy, and the high delivery seborrheic type, characterized by increased altered secretion of Meibomian glands causing inflammation. Tapi in 1977 first used the infrared camera to visualize the Meibomian gland morphology. Mathers et al. In 1991 coined the term meibography. Methods of conducting a meibography. First is a contact method wherein a direct transillumination by light probe is used with direct contact with the lid surface and uses special cameras. The non-contact method employs a slit lamp with an infrared filter or an infrared charged coupled device. There are other recent techniques used as well, including a dedicated infrared meibography machine, laser confocal meibography, and OCT meibography. All these methods are expensive and they are not available in every corner of this country, being a developing country. So at our institute, we decided to use our humble autorefractor keratometer to conduct a non-contact meibography. We included patients with versus without keratoconjunctivitis sicca with no Meibomian gland morphology, and we used this to see the Meibomian gland morphology, no Meibomian gland dysfunction. We could take 54 patients in our study over a 2-month period. These patients presented with symptoms of dryness like stinging or burning sensation, excessive tearing, sandy or gritty sensation, episodes of blurred vision or redness. Factors influencing dryness of eyes and systemic illnesses were noted, like use of oral contraceptive pills, antidepressants, long-term use of contact lenses, diabetes mellitus, hypertension, connective tissue disorder, hypothyroidism, and the like. Thereafter, a slit lamp examination of the lids and the ocular surface was conducted, and any obvious meibomitis was excluded from the study. Also, any obvious
asking us to join.
Ocular surface pathology was ruled out. A Schirmer's 2 test was performed using Whatman filter paper 41 strips to assess the baseline and the reflex tear secretion in these patients. Those patients having a Schirmer's score of 10 millimeters or less at the end of 5 minutes were noted as patients of keratoconjunctivitis sicca. Thus, out of 54 patients, we had one group of 28 patients with dry eye disease and one group of 26 patients, that is the control subjects, without any documented dry eye. Thereafter, a non-contact meibography for Meibomian gland dysfunction screening was conducted. The lids were everted and viewed on the optorefractor keratometer. The R model was Topcon KR 800. The gland thickness, tortuosity, and percentage dropout was noted in the upper and the lower lids. Pulse 5-grade Meibo score was used to grade the percentage dropout cumulatively in both the lids. This is a Pulse Meibo scale for grading Meibomian gland morphology, and it is based on dropout. So this is an image. This is the actual image from our autorefractor showing normal gland morphology versus on the left side there is an image of increased gland tortuosity, and on the right there is unhealthy atrophied gland. These two images show Meibomian gland dropout as seen very evidently and beautifully in these pictures. As a result, out of 28 patients with dry eye disease, more than 30% Meibomian gland dropout was seen in 16 patients, and in out of 26 controls, it was seen in 14 patients. Thus, we had a total of 30 patients with Meibomian gland dropout, significant Meibomian gland dropout, out of which 18 were symptomatic, 60%. There were a total 24 patients with no significant Meibomian gland dropout, out of which 42% were symptomatic. Thus, according to this study, the incidence of Meibomian gland dysfunction is 57.1% in patients with dry eye disease and 53.8% in patients with no dry eye. A chi-square test of significance was used to evaluate the difference between incidence of Meibomian gland disease and dry eye disease versus non-dry eye disease patients. And a p-value of 0.976 was calculated, showing that there is no statistically significant difference. It was also noted that 10 patients had increased gland tortuosity and 2 patients had gland atrophy. This has advantages of being a good screening tool. It can also be used to assess the and assess the severity by grading. So patients can be followed up also after treatment. And it is affordable, feasible in any ophthalmic or optometric setup. It is accessible, easy to understand. This study had one drawback that there was a lesser sample size because the study duration was short. The potential patients for screening are patients with keratoconjunctivitis sicca, non-specific ocular discomfort before taking up a patient for refractive surgery, patients working in low humidity conditions, long-term glaucoma medication patients, patients using contact lens, and excessive use of digital device. Thank you.
Dr. Aishwarya, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How much time did it take to perform this test?
Ma'am, it was hard. It was nothing. It was as good as a slit lamp examination because we would just make the patient sit in front of the autorefractor. We would switch it on and invert the lids. So we could directly see the meibomian gland morphology.
Because this autorefraction is something, if it is delayed, it can create a bottleneck for all the patients, isn't it?
Sorry, ma'am?
I mean, we need to rapidly turn over the patients in autorefraction if you have a large volume of patients, isn't it?
Yes, ma'am, that is true. But this also eliminates the need of another specialized machine for this, and it is not possible for all the people in the country to have machines which cost lakhs or crores of rupees just for a simple thing which can be done in an autorefractor. No question.
Thank you, Dr. Aishwarya.
Thank you, sir.
Let's go to next paper. Effect of long-term use of digital display devices. Presenting author is Lobamudra Bisi.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Lobamudra Bisi is available? Yeah.
Yes, sir. So shall I start?
Yes, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My topic for today's paper presentation is effect of long-term use of digital display device, that is computer and smartphone on dry eye. There is no financial support or no conflict of interest. Digital eye strain or computer vision syndrome, it results from increased screen time use in form of digital display device like computer, mobile phones and television, etc. It causes symptoms like eye fatigue, headache, blurred vision and dry eye, with dry eye being one of the major manifestations. In this COVID era, owing to the rampant use of digital display device, this needs to be evaluated regarding its type, whether aqueous deficient or lipid deficient for its specific management. It was a prospective study which was conducted for about 6 months, that is August 2019 to January 2020, with age group of 25 to 40 years. The right eye of all the subjects were examined. For inclusion criteria in the study group, 55 right eyes of 55% using digital display device long term, that is at least 8 hours per day, were taken, and it included staff working as information processing officer or data entry operators of our hospital and nearby government and private organizations. The control group included 55 eyes of 55 healthy individuals not accustomed to use of display device belonging to the same age group. The exclusion criteria were person with ocular and systemic diseases or on medication that can cause dry eye. It also excluded contact lens user and person with history of ocular surgeries. Now, method of evaluation was informed consent was taken from both the study group and the control group. The cases were examined at 9 a.m. in the morning and 5 p.m. in the evening on the same day. With ophthalmological evaluation for dry eye was done with special emphasis on tear film breakup time, Surma test, and ocular surface disease index scores were recorded both in the morning and evening. The results being there was no significant difference in terms of age and gender between the two age groups. And in the for the Surma test in the study group, the morning results, mean morning results were about 18 plus minus 2 in about all patients. But for the evening results, in about 90% subjects, they were the same. But in about 10% subject, that is 5 among the 55 subjects, we found it to be slightly, although normal, but slightly decreased values. In the control group, the results were 20 plus minus 5 in both morning and for evening. In about 76% user, that is 41 among 55, we found it to be decreased from decreased, that is about 6 plus minus 2. And in the values for OSDI questionnaire score, in the study group, in the morning it was 18 plus minus 3. Whereas it was slightly increased in the evening to about 23 plus minus 3. For the control group, they were about same both in the morning and evening. For the discussion, result analysis showed that after long-term screen use, there was no significant intergroup difference between the SARMA test result and the morning in the morning and evening, suggesting no defect in aqueous tear production. But there was a significant decrease in TBUT in the evening than morning result in the study group, signifying evaporative type of dry eye. The OSDI scores were slightly higher in the study group in the evening than morning, signifying mild to moderate dry eye symptoms, which resulted as the day passes. Now, long-term screen use can cause instability in the distribution of tear on ocular surface, shown by decreased TBUT, leading to easy evaporation of tears. Now, previous studies have shown that use of computers can lead to infrequent and incomplete blink, thus leading to dry eye symptoms. Now, study by Portello et al. Found positive correlation between number of incomplete blinks and eye dryness symptoms, which is consistent with our study. Dehaene et al. Previously reported that there were higher OSDI scores in person with long-term computer, which we found in the study group. The evening OSDI scores were increased. Slightly decreased evening thermal test in the study group suggests gradual effect of long-term display device use on tear film stability as the day passes. Thus, our conclusion is evaporative type of eye dryness is caused by long-term use of digital display device, and symptoms of dry eye outweighs the signs. That is, we can find more symptoms as day passes, and use of lipid emulsion-based lubricating agent can be thus advised in these cases as it aids to reverse evaporation. These are my references. Thank you.
May I ask a question, madam?
Yes, sir.
What is the difference between this device, that is BDT, and reading with the book? Is there any difference between reading with book and this device? Difference in the dryness?
Sir,
So,
when we are
would be more in BDT or in case of reading with the book?
Sir, in DDT, sir. Sir, in DDT, because sir, first of all, due to different font size and different contrast, and it also emits blue light. So, and when we are seeing the screen, sir, sometimes we tend to adjust our accommodation such that we don't blink so frequently. That is what.
Okay. Main is the infrequent blinking, and decrease in the blinking is more in VDT in comparison
yes,
to
sir.
book.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Dr. Lopamudra?
Yes, ma'am.
What is new about your study? I mean, what does it add to our already existing knowledge?
Oh, sir, ma'am, I just wanted to stress that we should, in this time period, ma'am, this is important that we should follow the, 2020 rule, like whatever problems with computer vision syndrome, because nowadays the use of desktop is rampant, ma'am.
And also, I'm keen to know, where did you get the control group where the use of digital devices was less than 1 hour a day? I mean, it's difficult to find out. Get people like this.
Yes, ma'am. In our hospital, ma'am, attendance of patients who are coming from villages and all.
Don't be under the impression that villagers use these devices less. They are also quite
No,
a bit.
ma'am. Yes.
So that is not the correct impression. I mean, how did you ensure this? Because
No,
less than
ma'am.
1
Yes,
hour a day.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. They are those who were using. I mean, many of the patients in our hospital who are coming for cataract, who are staying one day or the other, their attendance, they don't have a cell phone also, ma'am.
Let's go to next presenter. Thank you, Dr. BC.
Thank you, ma'am.
Our next presenter is Dr. Gaurav Garg. His topic is outcomes of inferior turbinate tarsal fracture for congenital nasolacrimal duct obstruction. Dr. Gaurav?
Yes, sir.
Well, share your screen, please.
A very good morning to all. Here I present the paper dealing with inferior turbinate fracture in congenital nasolacrimal duct obstruction. I have no financial disclosure. Congenital epiphora affects almost 20% of the newborn, with more than 90% resolving in their infancy and more than 60% in the following year. The remaining are diagnosed as congenital nasolacrimal duct obstruction, which are managed by various modalities with variable success rate. We have retrospectively analyzed the efficacy and safety of inferior turbinate tarsal fracture in cases complicated by the impaction of inferior turbinate in 69 eyes of 55 patients. Under general anesthesia, puncta of both eyes were examined to rule out any punctum stenosis, followed by Rho-plus. After dilating the upper punctum, probing was done. On confirmation of a bony block, nasal endoscopy was performed to visualize the distal end of nasolacrimal duct, inferior meatus, and the impaction of inferior turbinate. Using a lens spatula, the inferior turbinate was medialized. The patency of the duct was confirmed, and the patients were discharged on antibiotic and tapering steroid eye drops. They were followed up at 1 week, 4 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, and then annually. The outcome was graded as successful with a patent syringing on table and a negative history of epiphora, discharge, and negative fluorescent disappearance dye test on follow-up at 3 months. Coming to results, a total of 55 children presented to us with a mean age of 29 months, all displaying symptoms for a mean duration of 27 months. Almost a quarter of children had bilateral involvement and the rest were unilateral, among which right was involved in 17 and left in 24. Coming to a case. This is a case of a 3-year-old child presented to us with a right eye epiphora persistent even after Krigler massage. He was diagnosed with right eye congenital nasolacrimal duct obstruction with inferior turbinate impaction on nasal endoscopy, after which he underwent right eye probing with infracture of inferior turbinate under endoscopic guidance. He had a successful outcome on the table and at 3 months follow-up. Post-intervention, syringing was performed, which was found patent in 63 eyes, and the rest had 6 atonic sac. Among these 63 patients, there was a 98% success rate with only 1 requiring repeat infracture. Patients with atonic sac were advised sac massage with resolution in 2 and rest requiring dicrocystorhinostomy. Coming to the discussion, this table compares and summarizes the findings of the present study with those of comparable available data. Previous study by Atazeda and Khataminia reported the success of infracture as insignificant in respect to lacrimal probing, which was different from the present study. all previous study did the intervention without the confirmation of the diagnosis of inferior turbinate impaction by direct endoscopy. Moreover, it was performed as a blind procedure. These can be the reasons for the low success rate of infracture in the past, hence the acceptance of the completely and quick procedure. To summarize, our study, we present a large cohort with congenital nasolacrimal duct obstruction who has undergone inferior turbinate tarsal infracture following initial lacrimal probing under direct nasal endoscopy. It is a quick, completely harmless intervention with an impressive success rate. Also, in addition, we report a small group of children with atonic sac that had complicated the obstruction and was the main reason for the failure of infracture in our study. Thank you.
So may I ask a question to you?
Yes, sir, please.
What is the exact procedure of this doing infracture of the inferior turbinate?
Sir, on endoscopy, we found that these 69 eyes had an impaction of the inferior turbinate. It was lateralized. It was blocking the inferior meatus. So that's why there was a false blockage. So when we have medialized the inferior turbinate, the flow was patent, and the patient has no epiphoral post intervention.
So you are just fracturing with the probe.
We are fracturing with the lens spatula, sir, under nasal endoscope. Yes. I'll show you the picture, sir. Just a sec. Sorry, sir. Just a sec. In this, if I can show, so in nasal endoscopy, we can see there was an impaction and we are not able to see the lacrimal probe. And now we are trying to use the lens spatula and medialize the inferior turbinate towards the nasal septum. And after medialization, we can see a small silver color lacrimal probe visible from the inferior meatus.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Well, may I bring Dr. Javed? What is his opinion? Dr. Javed Ali?
Hi, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yeah.
No, this was a nice thing, but the way that I am looking at things is that inferior turbinate impactions are exceptionally rare in CNNDO. Most of the time, it's the thing that we see as impactions are actually not impactions, and it just needs a little bit of medialization. Those cases which Gaurav was talking might help are those cases where the NLD has been misdirected towards the inferior turbinate bone itself. In
okay, sir.
It actually helps, but most of the cases, inferior turbinate impaction ka jo diagnosis hota hai, that itself is not correct most of the time.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a nice talk. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
And what is your opinion, Dr. Sabita?
I would like to think, I wanted to know if the probe was easily seen just after medialization of the inferior turbinate in all cases.
Yes, ma'am. That was the end point. We were trying to see the inferior, we were trying to see the lacrimal probe from the inferior meatus, and post that we were trying to do syringing.
And you didn't need any intubation in these patients because this is
no, ma'am. We didn't do any intubation in these cases. All except one, all had a good outcome.
No, what is the risk that the whole thing will reblock, because you're just opening it up and then leaving it without any intubation. Does that have a intubation here?
Correct, ma'am. It can cause a fibrosis and it can have the block again. For that, we were giving tapering steroids, and we were keeping the patients on follow-up as 1 week, 4 weeks, 3 months, and then 6 months. So on every follow-up, we were trying to do FDT, and if it's positive, then we were taking up the patient again in the OT. Though in our cases, at 3 months, only one patient had showed negative result. Rest had the successful outcome. But yes, if we have the fibrosis, we can plan in the second stage. We can plan an intubation tube also, ma'am.
Any of these patients had paid probings done earlier to
No, ma'am. These are the primary cases. I didn't include the secondary cases. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Gaurav. Let's go to Dr. Mridula Sethi. Her topic is normalization of conjunctival flora following dacryocystoidectomy. Dr. Mridula Sethi?
Yes, sir.
Is he available?
Yes, sir, I'm there, sir.
Yeah, he's there.
So is my screen visible? Good morning. I'm going to present a paper on normalization of conjunctival flora following dacryocystoidectomy. I have no financial disclosure. Nasolacrimal duct obstruction causes retention of tears in the lacrimal sac, leading to acceleration of the growth of microorganisms in the accumulated tears. It's considered as a risk factor for an infective endophthalmitis following intraocular surgery. Majority of the cases of postoperative endophthalmitis are caused by gram-positive bacteria, in particular Staph epidermidis and Staph aureus, which are considered as a normal flora of the eyelid and conjunctiva. It's necessary to treat NLDO surgically before planning an intraocular surgery, which necessitates 2 surgeries to treat 2 distinct conditions. Therefore, there must be an optimal interval between 2 surgeries so that the conjunctival flora normalizes and the risk of infective endophthalmitis can be minimized. The study aimed to determine the time required for conjunctival flora to normalize following external DCR. So 52 patients were diagnosed with NLDO and underwent DCR surgery. Patients above the age of 20 years with unilateral NLDO were included in the study, and those with secondary acquired nasolacrimal duct obstruction, canalicular and common canalicular obstruction, acute dacryocystitis, conjunctivitis, history of previous nasal surgery, use of topical or systemic antibiotic 1 week preoperatively, intraoperative use of silicone tube, and active and symptomatic infection in other sites of the body were excluded from the study. So total 40 patients were included. Of the 12 patients who were excluded, 2 patients had bilateral NLDO, 3 had history of use of topical antibiotics prior to DCR, 1 presented with acute dacryocystitis and 1 with traumatic dacryocystitis. In 4 patients, there was intraoperative use of silicone tube, and in 1 patient, the growth from the conjunctival culture was positive even after 6 weeks after successful DCR. After complete ophthalmic examination, conjunctival swabs were obtained from both the involved and the normal site preoperatively, and it was inoculated immediately onto blood agar plates and incubated at 37 degrees Celsius for 18 to 24 hours. External DCR was performed by a standard manner by a single surgeon, and after 24 to 48 hours, microorganisms were identified by gross appearance of their colonies, gram staining, and biochemical reaction. Colony count was done by a viable count method. Postoperative medications included rotiprednol, etobenate eye drops, QID for a week and tapering weekly or a month, ofloxacin eye ointment over the wound, BD for a week, nasal decongestant drops, TID for a week, and oral NSAIDs, BD for 5 days. In the first follow-up week, skin sutures were removed. Conjunctival swabs for culture from the operated site was collected and sac syringing was done. Conjunctival swab from the operated site and the sac syringing was repeated every week till the result of the culture became negative or the colony count became less than that of the normal site. DCR was considered successful when the lacrimal passage was patent on syringing and follow-up visits, and there was a resolution of symptoms of watering after surgery. The time of normalization of the flora was defined as the interval from DCR until the result of the culture was either found negative or the colony count reached below that of the normal site. After 6 weeks, if the conjunctival flora did not normalize, then the patient was excluded from the study and then treated with the antibiotic according to the culture result. Of the 40 patients in the study, 31 were female and 9 were male. This is a chart showing the preoperative bacterial growth in both involved and the healthy eye. In the involved eye, Coagulase negative staphylococci was the most commonly grown organism. In the healthy eye, 7 patients showed positive culture. Cons and Corynebacterium species were grown from the culture from the healthy eye. There's a chart showing the bacterial growth during the study period, and we noted that there was a significant reduction in the growth of the conjunctival flora following DCR. The mean time of normalization in our study was 2.15 weeks and a range of 1 to 5 weeks. In comparison with the previous study, in study by OG et al., the mean time of normalization was 4.5 weeks. In the study by Eshraghi et al., it was 3.3 weeks, and by LB Ilbias et al., it was 1.47 weeks following external DCR, 1.04 weeks following endoscopic DCR, and 1.17 weeks following transcanalicular multidiode laser DCR. Our study differed from above studies as we did not use postoperative topical or systemic antibiotic following DCR. In a study by Simon Dulk et al. On postoperative infection rate after DCR without the use of systemic antibiotic prophylaxis, it was observed that as long as any pre-existing infection is successfully treated before DCR, infection rate without routine systemic antibiotic prophylaxis is significantly lower than previously thought. In this study, none of our patients had postoperative infection. So postoperative antibiotics may not be necessary for all cases. However, it may be cases of NLDO like mucocele, pyocele, and acute dacryocystitis to avoid the emergence of antibiotic resistance. To conclude, careful routine examination of the external ocular and lacrimal drainage system should be done before undergoing any intraocular procedure. The patient diagnosed with NLDO should undergo surgical correction before intraocular surgery is planned to minimize the risk of postoperative infective endophthalmitis. In such patients, it's rational to postpone elective intraocular surgery to at least 5 weeks after successful DCR surgery. The study's limitation was small sample size, and normalization time in patients undergoing DCR with silicone tube intubation was not assessed. These are my references. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Mridula.
Hi, sir.
Yeah, hi. So you know, this, I would say that the thought process was very nice, but we need to look into the limitations of culture methods.
Yes, sir.
If you're not able to culture something does not mean that that organism is not present.
Yes, sir.
That's one aspect of it. And if you see the literature, the range has been from 1 week to 7 weeks.
Yes, sir.
None of them have actually used the right technique of assessing that. If you really want to answer this question, you need to have a microbiome analysis of it. I'll just give you an example of it. Okay, one sample of a lacrimal sac, if you take from the sac, okay?
Yes.
One swab, I'll just give you last week example. We have been able to isolate 86 million organisms from that one swab of that one, of which 80% were not even known to human beings. We know that they belong to the bacterial kingdom, but human beings are not aware of almost 60 million of those organisms that we were able to code, right? And the remaining of them, that's hell a lot of them across all spectrum. For example, if you look at Acinetobacter, for example, like if you put up specific culture methods for those bacteria, you're not going to isolate it. But if you look into the microbiome, you will find that Pando actually have Acinetobacter as the commonest organism. Whereas your culture methods will show you Staph and Strepto and those kind of organisms, because those are the common culture methods that are, the things that we use commonly grow those organisms, right? So there are limitations of these kind of studies. We will not be able to conclude that 6 weeks or 4 weeks would be the time for normalization of the flora.
Yes, sir.
Maria, can we go to the other presenter?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I just have a question to Mridula.
Yes, ma'am.
Why would you advise not to use systemic antibiotics, and what was the rate of any patient had secondary hemorrhage in your series?
No, ma'am. No secondary hemorrhage. Systemic antibiotics.
Why would this recommendation that maybe we could do without systemic or topical antibiotics? I mean, at least I would be very scared to do a DCR without systemic antibiotics, because we really can't be sure how much infection is there free of. I mean, there's mucoid fluid, how much bacteria does it contain, and like Dr. Nali said, there could be a variety of organisms. I mean, it's kind of very scary to suggest that we could go ahead without antibiotics.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Mridula.
Thank you, sir.
Let's go to Dr. Alia. This belongs to us. Dry eye disease among medical professionals during lockdown period 2020. A cross-sectional study. Dr. Alia, are you there?
Sir, no.
Will C is absent. We can go to the next paper by Dr. Ravi Ranjan. Flapless external DCR. Is it time to say goodbye flaps? Dr. Ravi Ranjan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, he's there. You can share the screen.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My topic for today is flapless external DCR. Is it time to say goodbye flaps? I have no financial relationship to declare. Personal communication with many ophthalmologists revealed that failure of the procedure and tedious flap making in DCR are the main cause of reluctance from this surgery. As a result, DCR is ignored by many eye surgeons, and lacrimal surgery is increasingly being undertaken by ENT surgeons, particularly in peripheral areas. In an era when other specialties are always looking to widen their surgical spectrum, we must not lose these patients. To overcome the problem, I started a no flap technique in DCR, which is less time consuming, easy to perform, result at par. Total number of the patients in this study are 2,768, and period was from March 2011 to March 2019. Inclusion, exclusion criteria, and preoperative management are same as any DCR surgery. Curvilinear scan incision was made 2 to 3 mm away from the medial canthi. Medial 1/3 of the sac and upper portion of the nasolacrimal duct are removed so that the lateral part of the sac remains as a disc with punctum in its middle, similar to Toti's DCR. A is lateral 1/4 of the lacrimal sac. B is the tip of the Bowman's probe coming out of the common canaliculi. Lateral 1/4 of the lacrimal sac remained as a disc with punctum in its middle, like a funnel. 10 mm Arugas bone trephine was used to make ostium in lacrimal bone and passage in the nasal mucosa, and it is Arugas bone trephine. This one is the Arugas bone trephine with nasal mucosa and bone, and this is ostium in nasal bone. Anterior lateral part of the lacrimal sac was sutured with subcutaneous tissue of the medial side, adjacent to the newly formed ostium with 6-0 vicryl or silk thread, medial palpebral ligament, and rest of the incision is sutured. On a 5th postoperative day, sac syringing with 1 ml of 0.4 mg per ml mitomycin was done in newly formed passage and near bone ostium. No major complication was found during surgery or in follow-up. Changes I made was medial part of the lacrimal sac was removed. Arugas bone trephine was used to make ostium in nasal bone adjacent to lacrimal sac and nasal mucosa. Mitomycin C was used on 5th postoperative day for syringing in the newly formed passage near ostium and nasal mucosa. The patient were followed up for 1 year. Functional success was defined as an absence of tearing, assessed using Monk score. EP4 of grade 0 to 1 are known as considered as successful. Anatomical success was defined as patent with no significant reflux on syringing. Ostium size changes measured on 7 day, 15 day, 1 month, 2 month, 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year by the nasal endoscope. This one is the nasal endoscopy at the end of 1 year, and that is ostium in nasal mucosa and bone. Endoscopic view after 7 days, 15 days, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year. Ostium size shrinkage was marked in the first 3 months. After that, it is nearly stable and found 4 to 5 mm oval or round in shape at 1 year. And results were analyzed after end of the study, and 2,732, that is 98.66% patients were successful at the end of mean follow-up period, that is 12 months. 16 patients complained of epiphora of grade 2 or more and sticky eye despite successful syringing. 20 patients failed in syringing during the follow-up period due to closure at osteotomy site. Thus, in our study, anatomical or objective success is 2,748 patients, that is 99.2%. 99.27%, and functional or subjective successes 2,732, that is 98.66%. I have obtained the idea of doing flapless external DCR in accordance with the endonasal DCR, which has a high success rate without flaps. So the procedure of external DCR is designed to be done with neither anterior nor posterior flaps. I observed that the osteotomy done without flaps has a much less incidence of adhesion and synechia that may lead to failure of the DCR. Because of the known antifibroblastic property, mitomycin C was used here, and it was found that the safest and most effective dose of mitomycin C is somewhere between 0.2 milligram to 0.4 milligram per ml. That's why in this study, 0.4 milligram per ml mitomycin is used for syringing. In the present study, syringing of 0.4 milligram per ml mitomycin in the newly formed lacrimal passage on the 5th postoperative day decreased the incidence of postoperative adhesion more significantly because it is not diluted by the bleeding from nasal mucosa and better coincides to early proliferative phase, which starts from 3rd to 5th day of the tissue injury. That is the stage of fibroblast migration and proliferation in the wound. The success rate in this study was 98.6%. And despite the large sample size of that is 2,768 patients, and the success rate among published research varies from 70% to 100%, and the sample size of these studies published as yet ranged from 19 to 176. The success rate of this study is significantly better than the previously published reports due to the large sample size of the current study. So I conclude that the flapless DCR method is easy to perform, with reliable, comparative result and less cumbersome. I know my method is not for them, but it is boon for these masses. Thanks to my co-author and speakers, and thank you. Thanks for
Sir, any questions?
Dr. Ravi Ranjan ji.
Sir.
I ask a question.
Yes, sir.
So you have not made the flap, and most of the surgeons are making flap. So is there any advantage of making flap, or there is no advantage of making flap?
There is advantage of making flaps, sir. I have shown clearly in my slides. It is less cumbersome and adhesion is less. And that's why failure
I am not asking this thing. I am asking those person who are making the flap. So is there an advantage of making flap over this without making flap in DCR surgery?
I don't think so, sir. Not advantage.
Okay.
Dr. Javed?
Yeah, see, this flapless things have been happening for a long time now. And the recent paper that I remember is from Abdullah Mujani from Oman, who has published large data of these things. So while, see, everybody has their ways of dealing with that. And as long as their patients are happy, I don't think any one of us should have a problem with that one. But I would always preserve lacrimal sacs. And the presumption that endoscopic DCRs don't preserve lacrimal sac is wrong, because in endoscopic DCRs, you create a mucosa to mucosa approximation. Okay, as opposed to an external area where you may have to use some kind of a suture. So the very fact that Dr. Ranjan is also using the anterolateral wall to suture to the subcutaneous tissue, it just means to me that the flap is still there, at least the anterior flap is still there. And loss of posterior flaps anyways in randomized control trials, very large one, does not anyway cause any problem if you do not retain the posterior flaps. So he's still using a little bit of anterior flaps, maybe to the subcutaneous tissue, and that might be helping him.
Dr. Savita, do you want to make some comments? Flapless?
See, the thing is the flapless DCR, there is a difference in the type of healing. So unless, again, without a flap, I don't know how the results can be so good. And when you are opening up the whole thing, you're opening up, you're making an incision. So why not make flaps? I mean, it's hardly cumbersome. You have opened up the sac, you've opened up the bone and the nasal mucosa, everything. All you've got to do is just pick up the flaps and suture them. I don't see how it makes the surgery less cumbersome. Because with flaps, with suturing, especially in external DCR, the healing is by primary intention, and in your way, this is a secondary intention healing. Okay, so this cannot be a better method. According, this is my opinion. This is what I think.
Madam, it is here. It is healing by primary intention, first intention. I have consulted many pathologists, GI surgeons, maxillofacial surgeons, because
Mama, now you continue. I'll pray from here only.
Thank you.
You can carry on, Dr.
Well, we are short of time. Thank you, Dr. Ravi Ranjan. Let's go to the keynote address. The paper which won last year the best paper award in the Carmel session. Make your own punctal plug for punctal occlusion. Dr. Kashyap. Is he there? Yeah.
Excuse
Sir,
me.
please unmute yourself, sir.
Excuse me, sir. My paper is still not presented. Dr. Sangeeta.
Sir, please unmute.
Good morning,
yourself.
good morning, good
Sir,
morning, everybody.
Sir, please open PPT first for fish sharing, sir. Your PPT not visible, sir. Open your PPT, then share, sir. Yes, please put on slideshow, sir.
Yeah. So, friends, it's very easy to make your own punctal plug for basically for punctal stenosis. My co-authors are Dr. Bharti and Dr. Nidhi. Epiphora, the watering is the most common complaint. One of the latest least discussed etiology of epiphora is stenosis of the lacrimal punctum. And the most common presenting symptom is tearing, but patients may have vague complaints, like any kind of ocular discomfort. Stenosis must be distinguished from the complete occlusion of the puncti, which differs in its treatment and prognosis. This review relates only to punctal stenosis. Now let's find out some few facts are there, like lower punctum is larger than the upper punctum. The upper punctal stenosis are more common than the lower punctal stenosis, and the diameter of the punctum is inversely proportional to the age. No study addresses the issue of the predictive value of epiphora in diagnosing acquired punctal stenosis. Therefore, the incidence and prevalence of punctal stenosis is yet to be determined. And it is also unclear whether a complaint of tearing warrants a meticulous search for this condition. The treatments are available like stents and plugs, and surgeries have been advocated, which includes vertical slit, horizontal slit, 1 or 2, 3 snip surgeries, etc. The punctal plugs are also advocated adjunct to these surgeries. And what is our aim? Our aim was to find out do something about it and make such a plug which is very, very cheap, which anybody can make. You also can make without any problem and without any recurrence of punctal stenosis resulting in any epiphora. We did this study from for 3 years, from March 16 to April 2019. We examined the cases complaining of watering with punctal stenosis under slit lamps and other causes of epiphora were excluded. And these patients underwent punctal dilatation and syringing. Now, they were our group in different. A was syringing was done without any obstructions. Group B, C, and D had some obstructions somewhere. And out of group A, the group A1 there was a follow-up of first day and 7 days. And the patient did not return. The no return of the patient by 1 month, it was 97 cases. Group A2, if the patients remain asymptomatic for 7 days, but come back later on with the same complaints. When we say later on, it means any day from first syringing to 30 days, and there were 156 cases. We did 39 cases for bilateral, that is upper and lower punctum, they were ignored. So out of these, group A, we had excluded patients in group A1 since there was no availability for the follow-up. These are the certain plugs available like encerclage pigtail and mini monocastin, which is very common, and bicanalicular auto-stable intubations. And what we make was a Bicatron plug. It had a flat knob. It had a first arm of 2 millimeters and the second arm is of 10 millimeters. Now let's see the video. You take the cautery and there's a Prolene sutures 00, and then you do the measurement, and while bending it has to be a little warmed, and then you can bend it. So this plug is ready for you. How easy it is to make. Now how to put it in? Very easy. Little direct the punctum and insert it. And that's it. For removal, it's very easy again. Removed and the patient remains asymptomatic. Now, instructions to the patient given was, we told the patient that they might feel a foreign body sensation, but please do not rub the eyes. While touching the eyes, the patient may feel little elevation or flat knob end, but not remove it. And the patient is shown the plug in the mirror that, look, this is the plug, please do not remove it. If it comes out, just let me know. The antibiotics drops report, the lead hygiene has to be maintained. In the case, if the case was that they felt something protruding out, coming out itself, must report immediately, should ignore little watering initially for 5 to 7 days time, and should follow up every 10 days, and should report after 40 days for the removal of the Bicatron plug. There were some self-excluded plugs, like within 10 days, there were 3 plugs which came out by itself. In 20 days, there were 10, 40 days, 70, 40 days, 109 cases. But look at the watering. After 10 days, there were just 2 cases of watering, 20 days, 4 cases, 30 days, 4 cases. After 40 days, before removal of the plug, there were 5 cases. After removal of the plugs, in 6 months, we just had 3 more cases of watering. So what it says that in 40 days, there was exclusion of 109 plugs. But after exclusion also, the watering only increased in only 3 patients. That is 148 cases after 150 cases had no watering. So we conclude that the Bicatron plug are a very cheap alternative in case of punctal stenosis for the treatment and control of epiphora. And these are my reference. Thank you so much. I'd love to have any questions.
Well, we are short of time. Thank you, Dr. Kashyap.
You're welcome, sir.
We'll go straight to the next paper. We have only 5 minutes left. This is MPSOS Ophthalmological Society paper, characterization of occluded lacrimal punctum using spectral domain ASOCT, an exploratory study. The name of the speaker is not mentioned. Yeah.
Ma'am, please put on slideshow.
Yes, so my slides are visible.
Yes, ma'am, please go ahead.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My topic of presentation is characterization of occluded lacrimal punctum using spectral domain ASOCT in exploratory study. Coming to the introduction part, epiphora is a common presenting symptom. It may rarely be due to an absent or an occluded lacrimal punctum. It could be congenital or acquired due to various causes like aging, prolonged inflammation, infection, topical systemic therapy, local radiation, and trauma. Punctal stenosis could be an isolated punctal occlusion, or it may be associated with concomitant canalicular stenosis. Although a healthy canaliculus may allow normal tear drainage after punctoplasty, but when its underlying canalicular narrowing when underlying canalicular narrowing is present, punctoplasty alone is unlikely to be successful in addressing epiphora. In patients with occluded punctum, it is not possible to determine whether a healthy underlying canaliculus is present or not. Thus, the prognosis for punctoplasty is uncertain. ASOCT has been used to describe the healthy puncta. Very few studies assess the occluded lacrimal puncta and associated canaliculus together with the outcome for punctoplasty. Thus, this study aims to use the anterior segment OCT for characterization of occluded lacrimal puncta and underlying canaliculus together with the outcome of punctoplasty. Coming to the material and methods, it was a prospective interventional study done in 21 puncta of 13 patients at Sadguru Netra Chikitsalaya from duration of March 2018 to March 2019. And all patients with epiphora and absent or fully occluded lower puncta not amenable to dilation in clinic were included in the study. Written informed consent was obtained from all the patients and OCT images were taken using these parameters. Imaging protocol was lower lid was gently everted to align the puncta into a plane perpendicular to the light source. Long axis of the scan acquisition related to parallel the eyelid margin, and multiple OCT and infrared images obtained from each peripunctal area. Coming to the results, this is a demographic table showing demographic details of the patient with male is to female ratio is 4:9, with age group ranges from 6 to 56, with 8 patients had bilateral and 5 had unilateral punctal stenosis. Outcome following OCT and surgical exploration, out of total 21 puncta, canalicular lumen was not seen on OCT in 5 puncta, but located on surgical exploration in 2 puncta, while lumen was detected on OCT as well as punctal exploration on 16 patients. These were OCT images of few patients showing canalicular lumen at various depths. Coming to the discussion part, OCT identified 76.19% of the canaliculi that were located on microscopic assisted punctal exploration. And these lumens were seen within 540 micrometer depth from eyelid margin surface. 62.5% eyes had resolution of epiphora following punctoplasty. 3 patients was detected with NLD obstruction and 2 patients was detected with soft stop. In 2 patients with congenital epiphora, the failure to show the canaliculus that is later found at surgical exploration with OCT suggests either it was a congenital canalicular anomaly might be sited too deeply for the OCT penetration, or it possibly being an imperforate punctum rather than superficial membrane. Currently with this machine, the deepest lumen detected in this study was that starting at a depth from 301 micrometer from the eyelid margin surface. Closed punctum reduces the depth of OCT penetration when compared with an open punctum, and OCT light has to pass through the semi-transparent membrane tissue of the closed punctum. Although more subjects are needed, particularly in congenital cases, to ascertain the maximum depth at which a canaliculus can be identified when scanning through a closed punctum, but OCT might usefully predict the likely success of punctoplasty in patients with acquired punctal occlusion. Thus, to conclude, ASOCT might usefully predict the likely success of punctal exploration in patients with acquired punctal occlusion with the absence of lumen. Thus, it may help in tailoring of surgical techniques to individuals. Thank you.
I think if nobody has a question, so I won't ask a question, but for Sangeeta, ASOCT is something that has been, done from a long time now, 7 years that I could remember. And there is a good amount of literature on normal population-based data from almost across every part of the world now, including India. And obviously, the kind of, the potential of ASOCT is something that is quite underreported now. And we have shown in several papers of how it helps in diagnosis. Actually, there are so many conditions of the punctum that cannot be diagnosed on a slit lamp, but can be diagnosed on an OCT. These diagnoses, I mean to say, not the findings. So going forward, it has a lot of potential, and this is something with the coming up of dynamic OCTs, you can actually see how the functions of the punctum and the canalicular area is happening.
Yes,
yeah.
Like debris, fluid, this could be also seen with these.
Yeah. So it has a lot of potential, I would say. And I'm glad a lot of people, you guys are doing these things, and I hope that you guys can enlighten us on certain other disorders as we go forward.
Thank you all the presenters. Very good, innovative and session. I will go to Dr. Maurya for the last words. Our time is over already.
I think
Dr.
all
P.
the
Maurya,
presenters-
sir, final words.
So can we please wrap it up in next 30 seconds? We'll have to proceed to the next section.
Okay.
Sir, good morning, everybody. I think most of the presenters have presented a very good paper, an excellent presentation, and it was finished in time. And you have already completed this session very nicely. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.